Sorry, I've been running around with the dog. Wow. So anybody have any cool plans for next week? Next week is break.
Sleep.
Anybody else? I know it's a good time to catch up on work, but I hope some of you have some activity planned. I'm hoping to pack a picnic and put my family in the car and just drive somewhere. Probably won't eat outside. We can eat in the car, but at least to have a destination. Last year, my mom and I drove to Reese Beach, which is in way out in Brooklyn, and we just didn't get out of the car. It was just wind blowing. But anyway, okay. So, anybody else have any questions or anything? Okay, let me share. Okay, I don't have any color stories this week. Does anybody else? Okay. I meant to turn on Photoshop too, so I'm going to turn on Photoshop right now, so it might lag a little bit. So one thing I want to do is go over the quiz. So it wasn't meant to be a trick question, but most of you got the first question wrong, which was what is a color, and everybody picked hue. But the distinction between a color and a hue is that a color can also be black and white. So you wouldn't say, oh, that, what hue is that soccer ball? But you could say, what color is that soccer ball? So that's really the difference. So the answer was, I think, A and C, which meant a hue. And then one of the answers was black and white. So it was supposed to be both of those. So also I noticed the challenge of having an online test is it's so easy. You're sitting at your computer and you can just Google the answers. And I see that's what most of you did, because I said the exact same terminology, especially one of them. Well, what was a primary color? And, you should just know what those colors are. But I kept getting is, what was the phrase? There's a word it was using, but that you can't, they're colors that can't be obtained by any other color or something like that. So at any rate, but the point of the quiz for this class is to make sure that you're learning these this terminology, so that when I speak about it, when you go on in your future and you talk about color, because as designers and artists, you're going to be engaged in color and talking about color all the time. So you want to use the right terminology so that everyone's on the same page. If you're referring to something as a tint when it's really a value, or that it can make you not aligned in the conversation. So that was one of them, and the other one was pigment. And so a lot of people had something about water soluble. But the answer that I was looking for, and the way we've discussed it in this class, is that the pigment is the thing that is used to make physical color. So remember when we were looking at, in the news, there was that ancient purple. So the pigment came from mollusk shells. And when we were talking about that blue that came from a lab experiment that took a little turn and came up that brilliant, beautiful blue. So what they're manufacturing now to make that blue is a pigment. Okay, so when we talk about the pigment, it's that sort of essence, that raw material that can make a color, and then it's added to paint or dyes and such. So that was a distinction there. But pretty much everyone else understood everything else, the tint and the tones and the shades you guys have and values. And I think that's partly from doing the exercises. Anybody have any questions on the quiz?
I just wanted to say that I think the reason that I was thrown off with the first question was because of the study guide. It seemed like hue and color were presented as the same thing on the study guide.
Okay, interchangeable. Okay, I'm going to fix that. So one of the things too that it's helpful for me, and then I'm apologetic to you about it, I am using this course. Somebody else writes the course. Everyone writes different courses. And so this is my first time teaching it. So I have my own knowledge, but I'm going by what this other person set up. And so I'm going to make an adjustment to that. The other thing that I'm going to, let me write that down, adjust study guide. So when I teach it to other students in the future, I'll know, is so some of, in the description of the project is written by another person, and a couple people misunderstood, and I went back and I could see how it could be misunderstood, and they used 2 different hues for the last project, or even more hues. So it's really supposed to be one hue mixed with black or white, or the tone one, which was gray. And so some people added an extra hue in there. So I still gave you, even if you did that misunderstood, I gave you a good grade. But, and I felt like the student examples helped to really explain it, and what I was doing explained it. So, so sometimes language, it's important to write, that you read the description, because it's, checking off all the things that you did, but yet to really absorb what I'm showing you and what the student projects are too, because that helps flush out what the project will be too. And again, if you don't understand anything, or if you think you understand it but just want clarification, just ask me too. You can email me or ask me in class, because if you have the question, somebody else is likely to have it too. So I'm sorry that those things aren't clear, and thank you for telling me that the study guide threw you off. So your grade too on the quizzes is minuscule in terms of how much it really will weigh in your final grade. And one of the things that I really look at when I'm grading is how much you've grown and the effort that you put in, and what you've put into the class, so that there's a spot in the grading that adjusts for that. And the other thing about the quiz too, this was my first online quiz, and I put in 12 questions, and it just, somehow there was something functioning in Blackboard that gave 10 points to each question instead of dividing them equally into 100. So I'm going to adjust that too, so that the score for the test ended up being 120 points or something like that if you got them all wrong. All right. So I'm going to adjust that. So don't put concern into your grade for the quiz, okay? I think you all pretty much really understood it and got what I wanted you to get, and it helped me to know where things weren't clear. So it's also an assessment to help me as well in teaching you. The goal leaving this class is that you all really understand how color will apply to how you're going to use it in the future. It's actually funny, I have a student in my Friday class who is switching careers, and all of his life he's been a color scientist. I forget exactly what the terminology is, but he studied how the brain works with color. And so whenever I give a demonstration, he sends me an email saying, well, if you really want clarification on that. So I'm learning a lot here too, but I'm focused on the things that will apply to you more than the science of color. Okay, going forward. So any questions right now? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about digital color, and then I have several videos for you to look at. So here we have 2 color wheels, and so RGB is red, green, and blue, and that's what we refer to when we're looking at the screen. So then down below we have what would be red, blue, and yellow in the color wheel, which is those primary colors that you've been mixing since you were a kid. And when you mix them all together, you get that brownish color. So they all mix together to create a dark color, where when you mix red, green, and blue together, you actually end up with white. And first class, I think I told you about how in college I actually took to experiment and see how this worked. I put gels over flashlights and tried to hold 3 flashlights in my hand. And sure enough, when I put them all on the wall at the same spot, they went together and became white, which I think is really cool. But it's kind of hard to grasp too when you're talking about the color that you look at on the screen and the color that you look at sitting on your desk, because they react so differently, and they react differently on the screen, but and in the physical way that you see them, but then what's happening in your brain too. So what we're looking at, even though you see these two color wheels where one is supposedly red, green, and blue, what we're looking at is all RGB, because we're looking at a screen right now. So, and when you print something out, when you print it out, even if it was an image on your computer that's RGB, when you print it out, what is it? Anybody want to answer? Anybody know?
CMYK.
Exactly. So what we print out is cyan, magenta, yellow, and key is black, because that's what our printer has in the toner cartridges. So this is something that you need to understand the distinction, and I am going to help you to work with these colors. One of the things I wanted to go over, I showed you this square last week and had you look at it, and I probably jumped the gun doing this because I just wanted to get you in the idea of how your brain is working with color, but what you ended up seeing was not green. You saw the cyan, which is because you've got the red and the cyan, so you're not seeing green. But if you did this very same experiment with paper, you would see green instead of cyan, okay? So I want to talk a little bit more about CMYK. So you can see this picker here, and when you have the picker set on 0, you're getting white. And if you move all the pickers up to 100%, you're going to get black, and we call that rich black, because when you're printing, it means you're going to get even denser ink than just black, because you're getting 100% cyan, 100% magenta, 100% yellow. And so this picture I have of this woman down at the bottom is how all photographs that are printed are made. So if you were to look at an image underneath the microscope of some printed photograph, you would see these dots like you see in this blown up picture of this woman. And so when you look at the newspaper, you know how it's more dotted. So you may even be able to look at a color image in the newspaper and see these dots. So what it's doing is, the computer is doing this for us. It's looking at areas that are very dark, or areas that have a lot of light color in them. So if you look at her hair, there's a lot of darkness in her hair, so there's going to be a lot of black dots. But where her skin is, there's, like at the tip of her nose, there's quite a few yellow dots, and then there's a lot of magenta dots around her lips. So the intensity, or the intensity is the wrong word, the density, how many dots are close together, will create that image. So that's where the CMYK comes from. You might not have realized that when you're looking at a photograph in a magazine, that it's all made of these dots. If you were to look at a photograph that's printed, you know, in a dark room, that's what we call continuous tone, and it doesn't break up into these dots. It's more like a painting where the paint just blends together. The same thing happens in the photographic process, and I can't explain anything more about photography. It's beyond my knowledge exactly how that happens, even though I took a photography class in college. So now I'm going to show you the RGB slider. I was calling them picker because you can pick with that little eyedropper, but there's this is the slider, so you can move back and forth. And the front color is always the fill, and then the background, where it's got a little outline on it, is your outline of your shapes. Here we've got H, S, and B. So anybody want to venture out what the H means?
Is it hue?
It is. It's hue. Anybody want to guess what S is?
Saturation.
And B, actually, it's right there on the side here, and B is brightness. So when you use this picker, you're picking the hue. So if you pick green, you know, you can change that saturation. You can make it really vibrant, or you can dull it down. And then at the bottom, you can make that green the lightness of it or the darkness of it. But you'll notice that the hue slider does not get you black. Okay, so you're not going to get black and white from the slider. If you use this, you're only going to get colors. Well, I shouldn't use that word. You're only going to get a hue. Okay, so where was I? And so then this one, so whatever color you pick from your picker down here, it's going to give you the gray value of it. So that would be, in a sense, how, you know, if you picked a deep red, your gray value would be higher than if you picked a yellow, your gray value would be, would be lighter. And then lab, I know some people, you know, I was watching some LinkedIn videos, some people like to use lab more, and I don't remember why this person liked to use lab, but it's more, it represents more the human eye. So it specifies a color using a 3-axis system. So it's green to red and blue to yellow, which I don't completely understand. But with all of these, you're mixing colors on your screen and you're looking at RGB no matter which slider you decide to use, because you're always going to be looking at RGB on the computer, and when you print it out, you're always going to be getting CMYK, or depending on what printing process you use. You can actually, some of you may have seen printers that have multiple, that have six toner cartridges, where you can get an extra cyan and magenta sometimes. Any questions on that right now? Okay. So I have Photoshop here. Let me open something. I've been working on a pro bono project. See all these color swatches? They're all pieces of construction paper, and I'm doing this, designing a book for kids. And actually, here's a picture of the color palette. Open this. So I was actually I was scanning these pieces of construction paper, and I was actually playing with the hue scale to intensify the hue for this project. So different sliders may be more appropriate for different projects, depending on what you're doing. Is it not opening? Oh, yeah, it's still spinning. Okay, here we go. So here's this image that's interesting, has this color bar here. So when I go up to the color palette, you can, this hamburger here can change what you're looking at. So the CMYK slider for me, because I've been mixing color my whole life, is easier. So if I move these all down to 0, and if I want something to look, let me put a shape right here. So if I want to make something that is purple, I know that I add blue and magenta. And so I can, you know, make it a little bit more reddish or a little more bluish. If I want to dull it down, I add the complement of yellow. So that's how I think of color, and that helps me to do that. So, okay. There. So then I get this color. So you may operate differently. So if I switch this to the RGB slider, as I go and move these around, it works a little bit differently. And then some people just like to go and pick a color. And then once you pick a color, then you can go and play with the intensity of them. One thing I should say, if you are working with CMYK, you feel more comfortable working with CMYK, if you are making something that will be digital, if the final output is going to be digital, you really should convert it to RGB, because sometimes when you look fine on your screen, but then when it goes converting and it goes to an ad somewhere or something. So when you go up to image, under mode, this is where you're selecting whether it's going to be RGB, CMYK, and again, or you can make it a lab. So I'm setting the file itself. So there's something in the mechanics of it that is making this lab, producing it as a lab, where if I change it to CMYK, it converts it to CMYK. Now the image essentially didn't change the way it looks. Sometimes it does. So it tends to be, if you have a green, it might become very vibrant if you switch it to RGB. So ultimately, where you're going to be outputting something, so if it's ultimately going to be a digital output, you ultimately want to change the mode to be RGB. If you ultimately are going to be printing it, you're going to want it to be CMYK. Okay, so you can work in whatever mode you feel more comfortable in. So you may be working digitally all the time. You might be designing websites. You might be doing fine art that you're really, it's more projected and you're working with film and stuff. So you'll figure out what works best for you. I'm not going to tell you which works best for you, but in the end, it's a good practice to ultimately change it to RGB or CMYK, depending on what your output is going to be. Okay, so another thing I want to point out, so with a lot of these bars, there's this hamburger here. And so the hamburger gives you more information. And then in some cases, let's see if I can find one that has it. Sometimes there's two little arrows up here. So I know this is an Illustrator. When you open this up, you may not see the sliders. And so there's two little arrows on the left side of whatever the name of that window is. And those arrows will expand. So you can drag this up and down, which makes the color picker better. But if you're missing some information, look and see if there's two little arrows up there. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so I think I covered everything in this presentation. Yes, okay. So now what I'm going to do is bring you to two things. One, it's in here, sorry. I'm going to quit Photoshop right now. When I am running Photoshop, my internet is really slow. I was thinking I was going to show you those sheets of paper. Well, anyway, when I had those sheets of paper up, I just played with, I put the picker on that was HSB, and I just slid the hue around. So it was really cool. I actually do it in one of these demonstration videos. So what I wanted to show you were these demonstration videos. So here I'm talking about Photoshop and how to make a mask in Photoshop, because I've done two different projects depending on how you want to approach this assignment. So here I have this woman and I want to show this dress on her. I actually picked a Mondrian that was, I don't have it on my desk right now, but it's a beautiful gray and pink image, if you remember, and it was all painted. I loved the quality of the paint. It wasn't flat like his other works. So I thought, I can't create that image with the digital realm. So I went and I created a watercolor. So you see this is a watercolor that I put in. So I show you how to use a mask, which is a really great way of filling something in Photoshop. So there's 3 videos on how to we'll watch the 2 for the mask, which you're going to want to do no matter how you apply the project. And then I'm adding shadows to this. And then I went into Illustrator. So Illustrator, if you're doing something that's really linear in your project, in your Mondrian, it works really well in Illustrator. And and then you can take that Illustrator image and you can place it into Photoshop image. And then with the Photoshop, I do the same thing. I create a linear image that you can keep in Photoshop, but it just doesn't, I find it doesn't work as well, but it's also because of how I've been using the program. So if you become really adept at Photoshop, then you probably feel more comfortable doing it. But one of the things that I do want to urge you to do is to become equally adept at InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop, because they all have their differences. And it's good to become equally adept at all of them so that you use the program that's best for whatever the task is that you have at hand, okay? So any questions on that? And thank you in advance for filling out those surveys. I was struggling when I was doing these videos, trying to figure out how much I felt I needed to describe to you, because I know some people don't have any knowledge, and some of you, I feel confident in your Illustrator skills. But all 5 of these videos I want you to watch, no matter whether you have Illustrator or Photoshop knowledge. It's going to be helpful, and they're not that long either, okay? And then the last thing is I've put a Padlet board here. Oh, great. Claire's put some work up already. So what I want you to do is I want you to go and put your projects up in Padlet. And so when we come back, we're going to have a group critique and talk about your project, see where it's going, so that we can help you to move further in that project. So I'm going to go back to see your colored circles there. So anybody have any questions on that? So I'm going to have you all come back. Get my chat box out here. I want you to come back at 11:30. So that should give you some time to get your sketches up in Padlet and to start looking at the videos. And then at 11:30, we'll do a group critique of how you're coming along. And I'm going to be here, so if you have any questions, log in. And also to remind you that my office hours is on Monday after this class, directly after this class too. So if you continue to work and you have questions, you can come back and ask me. So anybody have anything, or are you ready to log off?
So we just need to put in the tablet and watching the video, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Watch the videos and put your work up on Padlet.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.